Assalamualaikum dan salam sejahtera. Greeting to all the teachers and PPD officers who are attending this Raspberry Pi webinar. On behalf of the Ministry of Education, Innovation and Talent Development Sarawak, I welcome and wish to thank all the participants. This webinar is a collaboration between MEITD and JPNS to introduce participants on the use of Raspberry Pi computers. As you all are aware, Sarawak government through MEITD had equipped every primary school in Sarawak with Raspberry Pi computers. Almost 10,000 units of Raspberry Pi computers were distributed to all 1,265 primary schools in the year 2021 at quite a substantial cost. This is an initiative to provide early exposure on ICT and to foster digital literacy amongst our children from an early age. It also provides our pupils at the primary school with basic computer knowledge to help prepare them for secondary education, where a lot of schoolworks will utilize computers. I'm glad to note that most of the participants today are either ICT teachers or teachers who are teaching the RBT subject, which means that you will be able to catch up with the content quite easily. Dear teachers, today's webinar will provide you all an opportunity to explore and discover the Raspberry Pi so that you have the necessary knowledge for you to start utilizing it in class or guiding pupils to use it after this. Please take this opportunity to learn as much as possible from the trainers. Even though we are using online platform for this product knowledge training, do try your best to participate actively in the discussion. Of course, we will not just stop here. Raspberry Pi is more than just a regular desktop or laptop. Its open source nature makes it a perfect platform for pupils to learn programming skills and to start with coding hardware projects. Another advantage of Raspberry Pi is its Internet in a box function that allows pupils to access to learning content or material preloaded in the device via an Internet network, which is useful for teachers to facilitate learning at school that do not have Internet access. This will provide a similar learning experience with those who have Internet facilities. I'm glad to inform you that a more comprehensive face-to-face training will be rolled out to every primary school starting next month, hopefully. This will be a 3-year project. You all will be trained to fully utilize the Raspberry Pi in your teaching and learning in class, as well as to foster innovation and digital skills among your pupils. This is also to ensure our pupils are better equipped and thus uplift the level of our education as a whole. As the saying goes, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. Here we are today in this first exploration and discovery with the Raspberry Pi webinar. I wish all of you a very successful and fruitful session. Thank you very much. Bye.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Wonder Exploration and Discovery webinar. This webinar is brought to you by Karuna Sarawak, initiated by Ministry of Education, Innovation and Talent Development with the support of Department of Education. I'm Eileen from Karuna Sarawak. I'll be your host and your facilitator for today. Last but not least, we would also like to welcome everyone, all the district officers and teachers to this webinar. Right. So before we start the webinar, we would like to invite everyone to do a pre-webinar survey by clicking on the link in the chat room, or you can scan this QR code to access the pre-webinar survey. Right, so while you are doing the pre-webinar survey, let us do a little bit of housekeeping. Right, so we'll be introducing you to some of the features on Zoom and also a third-party platform where we will be using this for our Zoom interaction. Right, so the first one I want to introduce to you, which you are also very familiar with, is the chat room. Right, so as an ice breaking for this morning, right, we would like to invite you to type we would like to invite you to type your district, which district you're from, in the chat room. Right, some of you are unable to hear the voice. Are you connected to the audio? Right. Okay. Right. Okay, seems like everyone is very, very familiar with the chat room feature. Next, I would like to introduce you to the emoji feature, which is the reactions, right? So at the bottom of your Zoom, you will see this reaction icon. I'd like to invite everyone to do another ice-breaking activity. Please select the emoji to describe how you feel right now. Someone feels like a robot, right? Okay. Yeah, seems like everyone is excited for the webinar, all right? So the next thing that I would like to introduce to you is Slido. Right, we will be using this for our Q&A. So please scan the QR code or click on the link in the chat room. Right. So we will be using this Slido to collect your questions, right? And you can submit your questions anytime throughout the webinar. Okay. So you can also vote the question that you really want it to be answered in Slido, right? There's a like button where you can click on the question, and then it will be voted. The top questions will be answered at the end. We will answer from the top questions, starting from the top questions at the end of during the webinar, during the Q&A session. All right, so we will try to answer as many questions as we can within our time constraint. All right, so even though your question is not answered during the webinar, no worries. Okay, for those who can't hear, is it better right now? Okay, so for those questions which are not being answered during the webinar, no worries. We will compile all the questions in Slido into an FAQ after the event. Okay, cannot open Google Form, right? Can you try to click on the link in the chat room again? Okay, so if you would like to receive the FAQ that we compiled from the questions in Slido, you may enter your email in the chat room, so we can email to you personally, or we will also be sending out the FAQs and the recording of the Zoom to the schools. So if you would like to receive it personally, you can type out your email in the chat room. Okay. Right, so let us start the webinar. First of all, you might be wondering, why are you here, or why do you need to register this webinar? Why are we inviting you here to learn technology, or why do we need to incorporate technology into the school curriculum? Right, the reason is that we are moving into a digital society, and in conjunction with the initiative to achieve Sarawak digital transformation by 2030, education is a key point to make this happen, as the students will be the builders of our community's future. So we want to let the students start young, and of course, teachers, you are the main facilitators to make this happen. Right. So let's move on and see what is the contents of our webinar. First of all, we will be introducing you on what is Raspberry Pi, how it looks like, and what are the components on it. And then we will move into we'll move into physical computing, where you learn to operate the Raspberry Pi and how to use it to program or to interact with the physical world, right? So how to you can through this session, the second chapter, you can find out what are the things that you can do with the Raspberry Pi. You can find out the potentials of Raspberry Pi. And then we will be looking into digital mapping projects. We'll be looking at some examples of some of the products that we can build with all the knowledge that we acquire in chapter 2. Okay, and then we'll move on into where you can start from, what you can do right now in schools, as we have a 3-year program upcoming soon, very soon, maybe next month or a few months later, right? So before you get into this very in-depth course where you get to learn the comprehensive programming, physical computing, what can you do right now before you go into such training, right? Or before you complete the training, what can you do with the Raspberry Pi, right? So that is what our chapter 4 is about. And finally, we will be having a Q&A session where we will be answering the Slido questions, right? So without further ado, let us go into the first chapter. What is a Raspberry Pi? And why do we want to pick Raspberry Pi to use in education, right? Of course, to answer this, we have to look at the builders of the Raspberry Pi, and their name is very straightforward. They are the Raspberry Pi Foundation, right? This Raspberry Pi Foundation is a registered educational charity, which is based in UK. So they aim to advance the education of adults and children, particularly in the field of computers, computer science, and related subjects. And that, of course, includes RBT and ICT in our syllabus, right? And this Raspberry Pi Foundation, when they built this Raspberry Pi, they intend to provide low-cost, high-performance computers for people to learn, solve problems, and have fun doing all this, right? Have fun learning, have fun solving problems, have fun learning technology, right? So they also want to make computer more relevant and accessible through outreach programs. So you can see that later on you can see how portable your Raspberry Pi is, or you've already seen your Raspberry Pi. It's very small, how portable it is, and you will know how cheap it is compared to the normal PCs. Right. So Raspberry Pi, they want to help people to learn through free educational resources and training. So what they want, so they have a lot of open resources, open source resources where you can go and see what you can do with Raspberry Pi, the sample projects that you can do with Raspberry Pi. And they have a lot of guides on how you can learn programming in Python, or the programming that you can do with Raspberry Pi, the physical computing. All these, there are a lot of open source resources online. So if you are interested, you can also go and Google or go to Raspberry Pi Foundation's website. They have a lot of resources over there. Right. So next, we want to look at the name. Why is it called a Raspberry Pi? Right. So in the early days, a lot of computer companies, they were always named after some kinds of fruit. So the one that you're most familiar with, I'm sure it is Apple, right? So Raspberry Pi Foundation, they pick Raspberry for their project, for this product, right? And then Pi, where does Pi come from? Pi comes from the word Python. Python in here is not a snack. It's referring to a programming language. So this Python programming language is commonly used for developing websites and software, task automation, data analysis, data visualization. And what we are going to look into today is how to use Python to interact with all the electrical components connected to the Raspberry Pi, right? So despite that, this Raspberry Pi initially it was built to use Python to program Python only. Nowadays, this Raspberry Pi has fully evolved into a fully general purpose computer which is capable of supporting almost any programming language. Right? So it's not just Python. It's already it can support. It is capable of supporting a lot of programming languages already. Right. So what is so special about Raspberry Pi? How is it different from the normal PCs that we use? How is it different from our normal Windows PC? Right. So first of all, it's in the construction of the Raspberry Pi. In your normal PCs, your normal Windows PC, when you open up your desktop, probably your CPU unit, you see that there are wires inside the desktop, or maybe when you open up your laptop, you can see that there are some wires interconnecting the components to each other, right? So, but on Raspberry Pi, okay, you can see that in my hand, it's a Raspberry Pi main board. Everything is soldered onto one board. So this is what we call a single board computer. Right, a single board computer. Everything is connected. You don't see any wires. You don't see any extra components. How to say? Extra dangling stuff on it. All right. So this is one of the differences of Raspberry Pi from the normal PCs. So another one is on the size. What you can see here is that it's almost the size of the palm of my hand, right? So for people who has larger palms, definitely my palm is very small. So the Raspberry Pi is actually a very small computer compared to our normal PCs, which makes it very portable. You can bring it anywhere. You can easily put it in your bag and bring it out and use it, all right? Compared to our normal PCs, we usually need a laptop bag to bring. Your Raspberry Pi, you can simply put it, for women, you can simply put it in your handbag. There's no issues at all. So Raspberry Pi, with the size of it, not just the size of it is smaller, the price of it is also a lot cheaper. It's almost 10 times cheaper or even more. Right, so a Raspberry Pi, a main board like this, usually comes in $200+. Right, so this Raspberry Pi is usually sold like this. Okay, this is the basic kit of Raspberry Pi. So the Raspberry Pi that the ministry has given you, they have bought the red and white casing together. So if you have your Raspberry Pi with you today, I'm sure you have you see there's the red and white casing wrapping this main board, right? So including the power supply, the memory card, you have to buy it separately, including the casing, right? But even with all this added together, Raspberry Pi is still a lot more. It still won't cost more than 1,000, right? It will hardly hit 1,000 ringgits for a Raspberry Pi. Okay, so other than that, the connectivity on the Raspberry Pi is also different. There are less ports available. Yeah, but over the years they are also upgrading, and actually right now the ports has increased a lot. Right, later we'll be looking into that. And the peripherals, some of the peripherals like your display is connected differently. Okay, and then you have the memory on the Raspberry Pi. Because it's so small, usually it has slower read write and lower RAM. But nowadays, the Raspberry Pi 4, even the Raspberry Pi 4 that the ministry has given you, it has actually upgraded the newest Raspberry Pi 4B newest model, it actually comes with 8 gig RAM. So your Raspberry Pi, the one that you receive from the ministry, is also 8 gig RAM. So it's the latest version of Raspberry Pi 4B, right? So there's also less storage because Raspberry Pi uses micro SD memory card as the primary storage, right? So in Windows PC you use SSD, you use SATA hard disk, but Raspberry Pi it uses micro SD cards, right? So relatively the storage is lesser. Okay, so let us take a look a bit in the components of the Raspberry Pi. Before I go into this, if I'm going too fast, you can let me know in the chat room. I'll go slower. And if you have any questions throughout the webinar, you can also pause it either in Slido, or if you need me to answer it directly so that you can follow through, or you're not catching up, I can answer you that. You can type it in the chat room, then I'll answer you, right? So we are moving into the mainboard of the Raspberry Pi. We're looking at the mainboard of Raspberry Pi, what is on the Raspberry Pi, what is available for us to use, right? So if you have your Raspberry Pi in hand, you can open up the white color cover slowly. Don't use too much force. There is a fan attached to the top of the cover, which is connected to the mainboard. So open the cover slowly if you are interested to see what is in your Raspberry Pi. Okay, so first of all, I would like to introduce you to this 40 pins, which is called the it's called the general purpose output input pins. All right, in short, we call it GPIO pins, right? General purpose output input, GPIO. Right, so on the Raspberry Pi 4, you have 2 lines of 20 pins, and then there are 2 lines of 20 pins, and there are 40 pins. Right. So you'll be receiving you'll be having my email at the end of the webinar. So you can email me when you have any problems. But regarding the technical, if you have any technical issues with your Raspberry Pi, after you found out you have any technical issues with your Raspberry Pi after the webinar, you can also contact the helpline on your Raspberry Pi case, right? That is Science. You can contact Science. They can help troubleshoot for you, all right? So they are the ones who configured your Raspberry Pis for you. So it's better to refer back to them for the troubleshooting. All right. So we go back to the mainboard. Okay. After the general, the GPIO pins, these 40 pins, okay, you have the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth just below it. Okay, this is the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth module. Okay, so this Wi-Fi module is for either broadcasting or receiving or connecting to a Wi-Fi, right? It's either for broadcasting Wi-Fi signals so that the other PCs, other Raspberry Pi can connect to it, or it's for connecting to a Wi-Fi provider, right? So there's only one module here. Take note on this because I'll be explaining. There will be a part which will be related to this later. All right. So you also have the touch screen component over here. Okay, you have the touch screen component over here. This the Raspberry Pi Foundation, they have a kit where it comes with a touchscreen display. So when you put this mainboard in the touchscreen display kit, you can connect the touchscreen to this point, so your touchscreen can work. Okay. So the next thing is a very important one, is our power source. Okay, so this is a Type-C port. Right, so your power supply comes in a Type-C version. Right, the older versions comes with micro USB. So the newest one is using Type-C. Right, so this receives 5 volts of electricity and 5 volts of electricity and 3 amps. So you need 5 volts, 3 amps of electricity to power up. All right, so there are questions asking if the webinar is recorded and if the slides will be given to you. Yes, after this, after today, which is the last session of the event, right, we will be compiling the slides, the recordings, and the FAQ, so that we can distribute it on the website. Then you will be able to replay it, so you can refer to it later, right? So if you are interested to receive it personally also, you can put your emails in the chat room. All right. So coming back to this mainboard, okay. So this is the power source we mentioned. Then we have the display ports, right? They are micro HDMI display ports. Okay. So the newest Raspberry Pi, they have 2 display ports. If you see, if you go online, if you want to buy yourself, you see this. You see that some of them they have only 1 display port with a big one here covering this whole place. Right? That is an older version. So what you have now also is the newest version with 2 display ports. It's using micro HDMI, and if you need to connect it to your display, your monitor, you will need a micro HDMI adapter or micro HDMI to HDMI or VGA cable. It depends on your display, which one you're using. Okay. So there were questions also on how to connect to a projector. Raspberry Pi is a very small computer. It's also receiving very little electricity, using 3 amps only to power up the Raspberry Pi. So usually for projectors, you need a stronger signal to be able to broadcast the display over to the projector. So what I would recommend you is that if you really want to show the Raspberry Pi on the screen, on the through the projector to the project to the LCD, you can remote into the Raspberry Pi with your Windows PC, right? And then if you need to show the Raspberry Pi on the window on the projector, you can use your Windows PC, use remote desktop software. So Raspberry Pi usually comes with VNC server. So on your Windows PC, you can connect to your Raspberry Pi with VNC viewer. All right. So that is how you can that is one way how you can project your Raspberry Pi display onto the projector through a Windows laptop remote into the Raspberry Pi. Then you can project the Raspberry Pi display onto the projector. All right. So it's not really feasible to connect a projector to a Raspberry Pi because it only has 3 amps of electricity connected. All right. So the next one is the camera. This is where your camera is connected to, your camera sensors, right? So you can buy some of the components, the extra sensors components online. Later we'll talk about that more. And then you have the audio port, right? This audio port, you can plug in your normal earphones, your normal speakers, as long as they have the 3.5 mm jack, right? 3.5 mm jack. Okay. And then okay, so the next thing is that you have this USB port. Then you have this USB port, two sets of USB ports, which means you have 4 USB ports over here, which you can connect your mouse and keyboard and your USB devices to it, right? So the next one is the network and internet or internet port, right? So you can connect to the internet also through cable over here, all right? Can connect to the internet also, right? So I will explain a bit on this on your internet. So I'm sure some of you have already found out your server Pi seems to be, you would think that it's malfunctioning, but it's actually not malfunctioning, all right? Your server Pi, it cannot connect to Wi-Fi internet. Your server Pi cannot connect to Wi-Fi internet. Why? Because your server Pi is used for broadcasting Wi-Fi signals for the other client Pis to connect to it. So your server Pi is configured to broadcast Wi-Fi signals or broadcast Wi-Fi connections to the other client Pis. Alright. So you cannot connect your server Pi to the internet through Wi-Fi because you only have one Wi-Fi module on your board, and that Wi-Fi module is used for broadcasting. Right? So once it broadcasts, it cannot connect. Then how can you get internet to the server Pi if you can't connect to the Wi-Fi internet? Is it useless? No, you can use this network port to connect to the internet. So for your server Pi, you need to connect to the internet via the network port. So what you do is you get a network cable, an Ethernet cable, connect it to the router. Let's say if you have Wi-Fi, you connect it. It usually comes with a modem and a router. So you connect the Ethernet cable to the router of your internet you connect your network port through a network cable to your internet router, right? So you can get internet into your server Pi, right? So again, to get internet into your server Pi, you need cable connection, right? You cannot use Wi-Fi. Okay. So let's see on the questions a bit before I go on. Is there any difference on the USB port, the blue and the black port? Yes. Right. So the blue one is the USB 3. This is USB 3. The blue one is USB 3. The black one is USB 2. Right. So USB 3 we is known to be more powerful than USB 2. Right. Why the host monitor can connect to Wi-Fi? I'm not sure what you mean by the host monitor can connect to Wi-Fi. It'd be helpful if you can clarify a bit. All right. How to connect the Raspberry if there is too low connection line in the school? All right. To connect the client Raspberry Pis to the server Raspberry Pi, you don't need any internet connection, right? You don't need any internet connection. You can search directly when you click on the Wi-Fi. When your client Pis and your server Pi is near enough, when your client Pi and the server Pi is near enough, you can easily find internet in a box. Your server Pi is called internet in a box on your Wi-Fi list. Then you can connect to it. Alright, so you don't need internet line to connect your client Pi to the server Pi. There is no internet connected. So this is one of the convenience that the ministry wants to give to the rural schools, especially to the rural schools. Alright, and if you connect the server Pi to the internet, with all the client Pi automatically connected to the internet too. Yes, your server Pi can act like a hotspot, like on your phone. Okay, your server Pi can act like a hotspot on your phone. So once you connect your server Pi to the internet, the other client Pis that are connected to the server Pi can be connected to the internet also. All right. You were given 3 units of Raspberry Pi. 2 was labeled as client, and all the other one was labeled as host. All right. I thought because usually what I saw is that the server is labeled as server. So the other one which is labeled as host is the server Pi, right? So for your clarification, thank you for clarifying your question. The host is the server Pi, which is the one that cannot connect to Wi-Fi internet. Right? So your question was, let me see. can find. Okay, so does that mean the Raspberry Pi can be used without internet since your school? Yes, the Raspberry Pi can easily be used without, very conveniently used without internet, right? The programming, even the programming that we will be introducing, like the programming softwares, the materials inside, you don't need to use it with internet, all right? There's no internet needed to use the Raspberry Pi. Server 1 can control the rest of the computer. The server cannot control the other client Pis, but the client Pis can share the resources that is on the server Pi. Okay. So your Pi, you don't need any internet to connect to it unless you want to update the resources on the server Pi. So for the schools which has no or weak access to the internet, you can connect your server Pi to the internet, to the router to get internet, and then your server Pi can get updated. The resources in your server Pi can get updated, which means and when your client Pis connect to it, they can get the updated resources also. Right, so you're a bit curious about the host and client get one. At Pi, one host, 7 is client. That host can't connect to. The host can't connect to the internet via Wi-Fi. It can only connect to the internet cable, right? Through the internet cable. You can only connect the server Pi or the host Pi to the internet through network port, through the network cable, right? So that answers the next question. Yes, you must connect the server Pi to the internet through internet cable, right? So the other computer can have access, yes. Right? The other computer also have to connect to the server Pi first because before it can have access to the internet of the server Pi. All right, you're welcome. All right, so since everyone is clear on that, then we'll move on to the Raspberry Pi, the backside of Raspberry Pi. So you have the backside. The only thing that you have, or when you flip over your Raspberry Pi right now, on the back of the bottom of the red casing, the red side, the red cover, you have your memory card slot. All right. So this is where your memory card goes in. This is the primary storage of your Raspberry Pi, right? So you can also upgrade your Raspberry Pi storage by buying a new memory card. So if you want to you want to update your Raspberry Pi storage and you bought a new memory card, yes, the SD card is acting as a hard disk, acting like the hard disk on our Windows PC, right? So if you bought a new memory card, you can easily go to Raspberry Pi's website, download their imager, right? So let me send the imager link to you. This is where you can get the, this is where you can get the imager on Raspberry Pi's website, and then you can initialize your new memory card with the Raspberry Pi OS, right? The Raspberry Pi OS, if you're curious, it runs on Linux, the Debian distribution, all right? But we still call it, it runs on it, but it's not exactly it, okay? So Raspberry Pi, it has its OS operating system called Raspbian, all right? So you can use this imager to initialize your memory card with Raspbian, which is the Raspberry Pi operating system. Okay. Means that once you are already connected to the Wi-Fi, then the Bluetooth connection disabled. Your Wi-Fi and your Bluetooth connection can work together. It's just they can be used concurrently. So it's okay. So the Bluetooth is not affected by the Wi-Fi. All right, the Bluetooth is not affected by the Wi-Fi. Okay. So once you connect to the Wi-Fi, you can still connect your Bluetooth to the other devices. Okay. The host Pi must connect to internet via router cable. Yes. What if the router cable not available? The client Pi will not have internet access. Yes. So if you need to update your resources on the host Pi, because there are actually a lot of resources on the host Pi already. So when your client Pi connect to the host Pi or the server Pi, they can share the resources on the server Pi too without internet access. Right, the audio got no sound when you connect the audio port to your earphone. If you have such technical issues, your audio has no sound, or you can't connect the Bluetooth, you can have science troubleshoot for you. All right. Okay, in your client Pi, you have one connection named Wi-Fi in a box. Oh, it's called Wi-Fi in a box. All right. So for some of you, it may be called Wi-Fi in a box. Some of you, it's called Internet in a box. The Wi-Fi in the box or Internet in the box connection comes from your server Pi or host Pi. Right. So when your client Pi gets connected to a Wi-Fi called Wi-Fi in a box or Internet in a box, it means that it is connected to the server Pi. All right. Does Raspberry Pi need external? I'm not sure what do you mean by external. You mean external storage? If you need troubleshooting, you can contact the helpline on your Raspberry Pi casing. Science, that is the science helpline. They can troubleshoot for you. Right? Does the Raspberry Pi need, if you mean external hardware? No, you don't need external hardware. To set up, to boot it up, you don't need external hardware, but like all your desktop PCs, if you need to operate it, you need a display monitor, you need a mouse and a keyboard, right? So it's like a normal desktop PC in a way, okay? Right, so back to the storage. So just now we touched on whether if you need to upgrade your Raspberry Pi memory card, you bought a new memory card yourself, you want to upgrade it, you can use the imager to initialize the Raspberry Pi OS into your memory card. Then you plug it into your memory card. Then you plug your memory card into the Raspberry Pi, then you can start up your Raspberry Pi already, right? So the slides and the recording and the FAQ that will be compiled from the Slido throughout these 3 days will be sent to you once we have finished compiling it, all right? So if you are interested, you can submit your emails. If you are interested to receive it personally, you can submit your emails over here, all right? Your schools will also be receiving the notification. Okay. So let's move on. We see why we want. What is another property or characteristic of Raspberry Pi that makes it special, or why is it suitable for learning? Right. So it's because first of all, it's closed in a way, which means the student, they have a closed space for exploration, right? So Raspberry Pi is meant for learning, meant for using computer as a tool for prototyping. So Raspberry Pi is only compatible, it only supports compatible packages or apps only that are meant for Raspberry Pi. So as Raspberry Pi is not a very commercial product, it is built more towards for learning and for technical use. You don't get a lot of commercial products like games, very heavy loaded games, or normal online games that can be loaded on it or run smoothly on it. All right. So you give your students a safe boundary or a boundary where they don't get a lot of distractions when they are using Raspberry Pi to learn, right? And then Raspberry Pi is almost only allowing programming or coding on the Raspberry Pi app, but of course it's not just that, but it's very suitable for programming and coding, right? So you can see that the Raspberry Pi that you receive, and also when you try to initialize a Raspberry Pi yourself, okay, you get to, okay, let me share the Raspberry Pi screen first. Okay. Okay, so when you get your Raspberry Pi or you put out the Raspberry Pi the ministry gives you, or you go and initialize your own Raspberry Pi or operating system, you see that it comes with all the programming, a lot of programming software here, right? Okay, so Raspberry Pi is actually more towards on learning technical or even for learning non-technical stuff, right? So it's a closed exploration space. And then it is also open, which means it's open to the physical world, because if you want to use your Windows PC to connect to sensors, to some electrical devices, you will either have to dismantle your desktop, your laptop, or use another medium device to connect to it. But Raspberry Pi, they have this convenience, right? They have this GPIO pins, which is the point of contact, where you can connect all your sensors, your electrical components to it. So you can do prototyping with your Raspberry Pi very easily. And also it can connect to external devices or control the devices in the physical world very easily through programming, all right? Because it has direct connection to it available for you. Okay, so this is how we say we want to let the students to learn the computer as a tool, right? And we want to let the students use the computer as a tool, right? So let's move on. We have a little bit of quiz to revise before we go into the first chapter, not the first chapter, the second chapter, all right? So, right. So the first question, what are the 6 aspects that differentiates Raspberry Pi from a normal PC? Size, no cost, yes. Yep, I see everyone got the 10 times cheaper, yes. Right, construction, storage, lower RAM memory, all right. So the next question, what are the components that are on the Raspberry Pi mainboard? USB port, yes. Connect camera, Wi-Fi, yep. The 40 pins connector, yes. All right, the RAM, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, audio jack. All right, seems like you pretty much got it. Right, so there was a question just now regarding your Wi-Fi is disabled because your country is not set. May I check with you if that is your server Pi or is the server or host Pi or the client Pi? The server Pi, right? The server Pi, the Wi-Fi is disabled. It's actually not disabled. It's not available to connect to other Wi-Fi, to the Wi-Fi provider, to other Wi-Fi provider, right? Because your server Pi is used for broadcasting Wi-Fi connections for the other client Pis to be connected. So your server Pi only has one Wi-Fi module here. You can only either broadcast or connect. Okay, so your server Pi is doing the broadcasting job, so they cannot get connected. Not cannot get connected. They cannot connect to the other Wi-Fi provider like your internet, right? Because the Wi-Fi module is already occupied. Okay, so the only thing you can do to connect your server Pi to the internet is to connect it via the network cable. Okay, Server Pi can share document to client Pi. Yes, you can share your document to the client Pi. We will look on this in chapter 4, how you can share the document with the client Pis. Okay, right, so let's move on into the second chapter. We will be touching on physical computing. Right, so what is physical computing first? Physical computing is to create computer systems that respond to or control the outside world. Right, so this is where we are touching more technical stuff, but we will of course start from very basics. We will start from how to set up a Raspberry Pi for usage, how to start and then how to start up a Raspberry Pi, how to operate a Raspberry Pi, and then we will go a little bit into very simple coding, right? Very simple and fun coding. And then you will have a little bit of circuits on the Raspberry Pi, how to transform some of the circuits that are already in our syllabus, in the RBT syllabus, like the LED circuit, to use Raspberry Pi as in the circuit, right? So there'll be a little bit on that, and then we will move on into seeing how we can control the circuit we connected to Raspberry Pi, how we can control it using coding, right? Okay, so we get started. How to get started with physical computing? Again, we need to learn how to start and set up how to set up and start a Raspberry Pi, right? To set up a Raspberry Pi, of course, you need a main board, right? You need a Raspberry Pi main board. So you already have your main board inside your red and white casing, right? In your red and white casing. Okay, and then you need the power supply and the memory card. So all these three are actually sold separately, right? So the ministry has already picked up all these three, including a casing for you, right? So there's you don't need to set up yourself already. You just need to get ready your Raspberry Pi and plug your power supply in, right? And then you need to be able to operate your Raspberry Pi. Just now there was a question on this, whether you need external devices. Yes, you need a display, a mouse, and a keyboard to be able to operate the Raspberry Pi, right? So once we have everything, all the equipments we need ready, finally we need to initialize the storage. We need to get the storage ready. Okay, so this is how you put in your memory card. Okay, you have the memory card face towards you. Plug it in over here or underneath your red color cover, and then be gentle. Don't break your memory card because it's very thin and fragile. Okay, so be gentle with it. Don't use too much force to push it in, right? And then you need to get your devices connected. All right. So this part you need to be very careful. Make sure you get all the devices connected first, and connect the power cord last. Okay. You have to connect the power cord last, right? Because like your display, especially the display, if you use if you connect the power source first, you won't be able to use your display later, even though you connect to it after you power it up. All right. So Raspberry Pi is able to power up in two modes. One is with display mode and one is with no display mode. So if you power it up without connecting your display first, your display will not work, right? Because it has already powered up into non-display mode. Okay, so remember, connect everything first. Connect everything. Another thing is that we don't want to electrocute our other components, our other devices, right? So we connect everything, then we power up the Raspberry Pi, right? Okay. There is one question. Let me see. If you want to use the pin, you need to open the casing. Yes, you need to open the casing. So that is also one of the reasons why Raspberry Pi usually comes with the main boxes, right? And there are a lot of types of casing in the market. So if you in the future you want to make it, you want to do more technical prototyping, especially using the pin, you can go and find some of the casing. There might be some casings which expose the pins, so you can cover up the other parts except the pins, so you can do prototyping with the pins easily, right? So you can research on some of the cases that can provide you with that convenience, right? So for now, as a start, the ministry wants to expose you to Raspberry Pi first, so to because there's not much knowledge on using the Raspberry Pi pin, so they provided a very cute one actually, and the red and white casing for you first, right? So that's for safety measures. Okay, and then right, so after we connect our cables, we power up, we will see the first screen with 4 raspberries and a lot of lines of text, right? So these lines of text, just for your info, is actually the packages that are running in the operating system, right? So if you are curious, you can, when it boots up, you can also go and see what are some of the packages that are running behind the Raspberry Pi operating system, right? So the OK means that all these packages are loaded properly. They have successfully loaded up, right? And then when you see this screen, it means that your Raspberry Pi is ready to use, right? Your Raspberry Pi is ready to use. So let me show you on the real Raspberry Pi. So this is what the Raspberry Pi desktop looks like. Okay, and then you have the software here. So this Raspberry icon on your top bar, your top panel. This Raspberry Pi icon acts like the Windows icon on your Windows PC, right? And you have all your softwares that are available in Raspberry Pi in here, right? So you have programming, you have for education, you have Office. So this Office X is like our Microsoft Office. We will be touching on this later in chapter 4. And then we have the internet, the browser, our browser, the Chromium browser. Right? This Chromium is similar to your Google Chrome, but it is not 100% like your Google Chrome. So this is a more lightweight version. Some of the things that you can run on Google Chrome, you don't necessarily can run on this Chromium browser, all right? Because this is more lightweight. Google Chrome is a very heavy loaded one, all right? And then you have your sound and video, your video player over here. And then you have graphics, okay? Some image viewer, you have image editor, and then you have some accessories over here, and the help, you can see how you can get started, or you even have projects over here, right? And then you have your settings, right? So this is what you have on your Raspberry Pi. So the other icons are some of the shortcuts. First, you have the Chromium browser, you have your File Explorer, and you have your terminal. So this terminal is like the command prompt on Windows, right? Okay. So the board is actually a microcontroller board similar to Arduino. It is similar to Arduino, but we don't call that a microcontroller board. It's actually a fully functioning desktop computer, right? So it's a single board computer. That's how we call it, right? Same for Arduino. Okay. Next we have, all right, we'll look at the Wi-Fi connection, right? So if you're not just the Wi-Fi connection, the network connection. So if you have your network connected, you see 2 blue arrows like what I have right now. But if your network is not connected, you will see these 2 red crosses, all right? Very straightforward, very easily identified. So if you need to connect to the Wi-Fi, you can simply click on this icon. Right now, I can't connect to Wi-Fi because I'm actually showing you on the server Pi, right? Or your host Pi. Okay. So if you need to connect to the Wi-Fi, same like your Windows, you just click on the Wi-Fi icon or the network icon, and then select the Wi-Fi that you want to connect to, right? And then if you need to enter the password, you will need to enter the password, right? A little bit more info for you over here is, right, when you put your mouse on the arrows, you see there are two lines of text. First one, you see that there's the ETH0. That is referring to your network port, the network connected to your network port. So if your network port is connected, you get the IP address you set configured, right? So it means that your network port is connected. Okay, and then the second one, on your server PI, you will see BR0. It means that it's configured to broadcast network, broadcast Wi-Fi connection to the other devices, right? So on your client PIs, I think you should be seeing Wi-Fi 0 instead, right? So one of your PC that you got doesn't have the network icon. You might be able to, I think you should be able to configure it from the Raspberry Pi configuration over here. It's not here. You can see if on the interfaces, okay, not here. Let me see, yeah. Okay. So maybe you can check it at the panel settings. Right, so you can see there's the wireless and wired network over here. If you don't have this, you just have to go and click add, and then add it from here, right? So now I have it, so it's not in my list. Okay. All right. So yeah, on your client PC, you can you are seeing WLAN 0 for the BR0 line, right? So on your client PI, you are seeing WLAN 0, which means wireless local area network, right? Okay, and what if the school doesn't have internet access? Yes, you still can use the Raspberry Pi if the school doesn't have internet access, all right? Because your client PIs do not need internet access to connect to your your server or your host Pi. It can directly connect by using by connecting to Wi-Fi in the box, or it's labeled as internet in the box on your Wi-Fi list. Okay. Means that connect the server Pi with LAN cable, and it will transmit the Wi-Fi to the client Pis. Yeah, if the client Pis are connected to the server Pi, then you can the internet will be shared like a hotspot, right? So your server Pi will act like a hotspot. Right. So next to it is the Bluetooth icon and your sound icon. So if you connected your earphones but you don't get any sound, maybe you can try to check this also, right? So these are some of it. So another one here, just an additional info. This is the VNC, which you can use your Windows PC to remote, and then you will get like a display what you see right now, right? But I'm not using VNC right now. I'm using another software, right? So if you want to connect to the server, no, you want to connect to your Pi through your Windows PC, there are two ways, which is using the VNC viewer, or you can use AnyDesk, right? So the difference between these two is that AnyDesk, you will need internet connection, right? You will need internet connection. But VNC viewer, you do not need internet connection, right? So if you are connected to the Pi through Wi-Fi, your client Pi or your laptop, your Windows PC is connected to the Raspberry Pi through Wi-Fi connection or through network connection, you can directly VNC in without internet, all right? Okay, so how far can the client go away from the server? This one will be including, we'll put it in the FAQ and let you know how far it can go, right? So try to not go too far. Remember, your your Raspberry Pi is a small computer, right? It can work within a house, but how far it can go, we will put the exact numbers in it, right? Sekolah kamu tak ada capaian internet tak apa, kamu tak perlu internet untuk guna Raspberry Pi, okay? Untuk guna Raspberry Pi, kamu hanya perlu start up dia, lalu kamu boleh guna sudah, okay? Untuk connect Raspberry Pi client Pi with the host Pi or the server Pi, kamu hanya perlu guna Wi-Fi untuk connect to the server Pi, right? Okay, so next, boleh sambung dengan projector kah? Tidak recommend, okay? Kalau kamu perlu sambung dengan projector, kamu boleh guna Windows PC, remote desktop ke dalam Raspberry Pi. Lalu kamu boleh guna Windows PC untuk connect projector, untuk sambung projector. Kerana kamu punya, kerana Raspberry Pi, dia tidak ada high voltage untuk startup. Dia ada hanya 5 volts, 3 amperes. Jadi kamu hanya, mungkin hanya dapat connect dengan monitor biasa, dengan display biasa, right? Kerana projector dia perlu signal yang lebih strong lah. Okay. This is more or less like microbit. Not really, I would say Raspberry Pi is more comprehensive. Your school doesn't have internet access, no worries. You can still use the Raspberry Pi without internet access. Alright, so let's move on into some simple coding. We will be introducing you to Scratch. So this Scratch comes with your Raspberry Pi. Whether it's the ministry provided one or you initialize yourself, Scratch comes with it, right? So this is the convenience of Raspberry Pi. They, like we said, they want to let you to be exposed to programming with the with convenience and of course to learn with fun. So they have this Scratch. It is a drag and drop programming, right? It's a visual programming language. So you see that there are a lot of blocks here, right? It's something like your M block, right? You can install M block on Raspberry Pi. Only the Raspberry Pi, not the Raspberry, the M block web version is usable on the Raspberry Pi. You cannot install M block on the Raspberry Pi, alright? So you have this. This is also block programming. So it's similar with your M block also. Okay. So it's a drag and drop and block. We also call it block programming because it's using blocks, right? So why we introduce this first is that we want to let the students as a start as for elementary programming, they focus more on their logical thinking training, right? And also with these blocks and colors, we want to encourage students to use their creativity to create solutions for problems, right? So with this simple interface, drag and drop, the colors, the blocks, it actually makes programming looks more fun than the usual text with the usual text only programming, right? But of course, with this simplicity and this intrigue interface, there are a lot of limitations to it also because you have all your features predefined here in the blocks, right? So there are limitations to it. You can do very complex features with it, right? Yes, you can only use M-Block online on Raspberry Pi, so we would recommend you to use Scratch in Raspberry Pi, right? So they are actually quite similar. Okay. Right. Okay. So we'll be watching a project called Lost in Space. This is a sample project on Scratch. So you can also use your Raspberry Pi, try to follow
what is done on the screen, right? So you can, and also, or you can try it out later after you watch it, right? So it will be showing you how to use Scratch and what are the things available on Scratch, right? Everything you see on screen in the video right now, it is all offline, all right? All the resources are offline. So you can explore this without internet access later also, right? Okay, so let's watch the video. Okay, so this is an example project on Scratch. I forgot to mention just now, there are two versions available on your Raspberry Pi. One is Scratch and one is Scratch 3. So with just now with the simple project, you can use Scratch. You can also use Scratch 3, but you just need Scratch for that, right? So for Scratch 3, it's more there are more extensions and more features available. So if you want to go into more complex stuff or you want more features, you can use Scratch 3, all right? So later we'll be looking at, we'll be watching a video which is using Scratch 2, but you can also follow it with using Scratch 3, all right? That will be more onto how, there will be more onto how you can use Scratch to control physical devices. All right. So, okay. Okay, let's move on. All right, we'll get a little physical right now. All right, so we'll be looking at circuits and hardware. So what's involved in physical computing? So these are the three stages that will be involved in physical computing. We will start with the hardware, where you will be building a simple circuit, such as a simple LED circuit, all right? And then you will then we will move into interfacing, where we will control a simple output simple items, simple commands to the circuit to control the circuit. And then we'll go and look into more complex circuits with Python, right? So there will be some serious programming in the later stage. Okay, so to do physical computing, you need some hardware, right? So there are some tools in the market, also a product of Raspberry Pi Foundation. Of course, you don't have it yet. You can consider adding this in the later stage when you want to advance more in your teaching and learning process, right? So this is the additional tool which you can consider later on or buy later on. It is called the parts pack, right? So in this parts pack, there are actually some very safe electrical components. Okay, you have the wires for you to do connections. You have a temperature probe, some sensors. The temperature probe is also a sensor. You have LEDs. You have a breadboard, and you also have a GPIO pin, which is these 40 pins layout guide card, all right? So when you buy a Raspberry Pi, it usually comes with a GPIO pin layout guide card for you to, it looks like this, right? I'm not sure if you have it in your Raspberry Pi kit, but if you don't have it, you can also find it online easily, right? So look for the one with 40 pins because your GPIO pins, it is a 40 pin version, right? There are two versions, one with 26 pins and one with 40 pins. So look for the one with 40 pins, all right? Okay, so let's take a look on a few of the components in the parts pack, right? So these are some of the things that you use. Usually the buzzer, the LED, the capacitor, right? So these are the polarized stuff, which means you have the negative on the short leg and the positive on the longer leg. Okay, and then you have some resistors, and yep, the GPIO pin card. Okay, so this is where you get to refer to the GPIO card to see which pin that you need to connect to on the Raspberry Pi for each of the components, right? So there are three types of pins. The 40 pins are categorized into three types. First is the special users pins, and then second one, there are the special properties pins, and there's the general purpose pins, all right? So we'll go on very surface on this because we don't want to overwhelm you with too much on the technical first, right? So there will be an upcoming course, 3 years upcoming course for you to participate in to get more in-depth learning on all the topics that we cover today. Right. So just a little warning, the numbers or the levels, right? The 5-volt ground 14, 15 or the GPIO numbers, they are not in order, right? So make sure you refer to the layout guide card for it, right? Okay, and then do not, although there are 5-volt pins, do not connect motors or 5-volt devices like Arduinos onto the GPIO pins. Okay, so let's move on and we will look at the next thing. So if you have any questions on the topics that we have touched so far, you can put it in the chat room, right? Okay, so let's take a look at a breadboard, right? So this is a breadboard, but a very ancient one, right? So this is how an old breadboard looks like, okay? So the inside of a breadboard, this is how a breadboard looks like on the surface. You have a lot of holes on it, okay? And it's plastic. And then inside of the breadboard, you have these clips, all right? These spring clips. These spring clips is for holding onto wires, all right? So what is the use of a breadboard? The breadboard is actually for you to create temporary circuits, especially when you are prototyping. You want to show your students how to connect a circuit or maybe how to connect it, what is an incorrect connection, what is the correct connection, a correct circuit. You can use a breadboard because it holds the wires pretty firmly, right? So you don't get the wires flipping here and there when you are trying to connect it, right? And then you only have to plug it into the holes of the breadboard, right? So these are the spring clips that holds the wire, all right? So you can see it's a metal one, it's springy. So don't plug something that is too large into the hole until you make the spring clips loose, right? If the spring clips are loose in the future, it won't be after that it won't be able to hold on to the thin wires firmly anymore, right? Yep. So okay, so yeah, so the Raspberry Pi kits, you can get it on citron.io, okay? Or not just the Raspberry Pi kits, a lot of tools that are related to Raspberry Pi, you can get it from citron.io, right? Okay, so that is where you can get all the tools for your prototyping. Okay, so back to this breadboard, you have the spring clips lined up, right? So there are five of these clips. You can clip 5 wires or 5 legs of the components, and they are connected, all right? So you have the power rails at the side. It's for more complicated circuits or for powering up, right? So we'll be watching a little bit of video on how to get started with using a breadboard, right? So let us watch the video.
Hey guys, this video is all about breadboards, what they are and how you can use them when designing electronic circuits. So what is a breadboard? Well, here's the one that I use the most. A breadboard helps you build electronic circuits without actually soldering any components together. The breadboard is used to make the necessary connections between individual components. And if you make a mistake or if you want to change something, you can easily swap or move components around. So how do you actually use a breadboard? First of all, it is important to know that there are connections inside the breadboard itself that act like conducting wires. The holes, also known as connection points, are connected in groups of 5. This is what connects individual components together. So for example, if I wanted to connect a light bulb to a battery, I could create a circuit like so. The electrical connections inside the breadboard act as a wire and complete the circuit. I can also add a push button to the circuit like this. We can even get fancier by adding a variable resistor or a potentiometer to control the brightness of the light bulb. Just to be clear, while the connection points on the breadboard are electrically connected in groups of 5 like this, 2 adjacent groups are not connected. So if you hook up your components like this, you wouldn't have a complete circuit. How do you provide power to the breadboard? Most breadboard types have power rails. They let you connect a voltage source, such as a battery pack or a wall adapter, at one end of your breadboard and have easy access to power from any point. Some breadboards have a gap in the middle of the power rail, as indicated by the colored bands. The top and the bottom power rails may not be connected either, but you can use short jumper wires to connect them all. Speaking of wires, when working on a breadboard, do not use the kind of wires that have a dozen small conductors inside them. They just do not fit well inside the holes and make for a less reliable connection. Instead, you should use solid core wire. You can buy several spools of wires of different colors and make your own jumper wires as long as you need them to be. Or you can get a set of jumper wires that have pins at the ends meant to go inside a breadboard. How do you place components on a breadboard? That's actually easy. Just insert the metal leads of your parts firmly inside the connection points. Most electronic components will fit in just fine. But it is important to orient your components the right way. Remember that the holes inside the breadboard are connected in groups, so if I place an LED like so, it will never light up. Right now, its metal legs are practically bridged together, and no electricity flows through the LED. Fortunately, since this is a breadboard, I can easily take out the LED and place it the right way. Now the circuit is complete and the LED lights up. If you are working with integrated circuits or chips, place them in the middle of your breadboard. That's what the gap in the middle is designed for. If you place them like this, you're basically creating a short circuit between the pins, and your circuit isn't going to work. The connection points along the gap in the middle are not electrically connected, so you can use chips like this without blowing anything up. Now let's put theory into practice and build a simple LED circuit on our breadboard. I'm going to place the LED first and then build the circuit around it. Next, to limit the current that goes through the LED, I will add a 470 ohm resistor in series. Now I will add a push button also in series. Next, I connect the power source to my circuit, and that's it. When I press the button, the LED lights up. And by now you already know enough about breadboards to start making cool circuits. Have fun and subscribe to my channel to never.
Okay, so this is a simple use of the breadboard. Like he said, you don't need to solder. You can just plug your electrical components in, right? And you can remove it easily. So we don't have any worries of putting it incorrectly initially. The students can easily do the corrections when they are when they plug it wrong, right? Or you don't have to worry about getting burnt or your students getting burnt because you need to use the soldering iron, right? So this is one of the tools that you can use in class, which is safe for students to prototype, right? Okay, so let's move on. Before we move on into a little bit more complicated, let's have a bit of quiz to revise some of the basics. So I would like you to identify the 3-volt pins on this layout guide card, right? The pin layout guide card. Which are the pin numbers of the 3-volt pin? You can type it in the chat box. Just the 3-volt pin, yeah? So number 1 is correct. Number 2 and 4 is actually the 5-volt pins, all right? Number 3 is GPIO2, number 2, right? So 1 and 17 are the 3-volt pin, right? Okay, so you refer to the labels on the left or on the right for the right side numbers, on the left for the left side numbers, right? So this is how you identify the pins, what they are for, right? So these numbers in the middle are the pin numbers. On the left and right side is the labels of the pin, right? The purpose of the pin. And then we have, right, the next one, identify the ground pins. Which are the ground pins? Six, 9, 14, 20, 25, 30, 24, 39. All right, correct. Okay, so the last one, again, what is pin 17? 3 volts pin, yeah, correct. All right, so this is how you read a GPI or layout pin type, okay? And then next, what is the metal thing that holds the wires in a breadboard? It's not called a pin. Did anyone manage to get it? Catch it? What is it called? The metal thing that is inside the breadboard. All right. So yeah, someone got it. Spring clips. So spring clip is the thing that holds your wire in a breadboard, right? Okay, so we are almost halfway through our webinar. And if you have any questions, again, you can put it in Slido. We'll be having a 10 minutes break. You can come back at, let me see, 10, let's continue at 10:20, all right, 10:20. So you can have your break, and you can also, if you have any questions, you can put it in Slido, and we'll be answering it at the end of the webinar, right? So we still have half more to go, right? So you can go for your break now. All right. Just now I found out I missed out a question. You were asking whether the server Pi can monitor the client Pi's. No, you can't monitor the client Pi's from the server Pi, right? So you can only share resources. The client Pi can only get the resources from the server Pi when it's connected to the client Pi, and when it is connected to the server or the host Pi, right? Okay. Okay, so let's move on. We will now look into building a simple circuit, all right? Building a simple circuit. So what we're going to look into is the LED circuit. Okay, so what you see here is one of the traditional circuits that we usually see in our textbooks, where we connect an LED to a battery and a switch, and sometimes we have a resistor in it, right? So we are going to see how we can transform this simple circuit, a traditional one, into a modern or more advanced one with a Raspberry Pi, right? So we'll be replacing the battery and the switch with a Raspberry Pi. Okay, so we'll be watching a video on it, how to connect your LED, your circuit to a Raspberry Pi and power up using a Raspberry Pi. Okay.
Okay, I'm going to show you how to turn this into this. What you're needing is one wire that has like these needle-like things on both ends, two wires that have a needle on one end and an opening on the other, an LED and resistor, a breadboard, and a Raspberry Pi. First thing I'm going to do is to connect the two wires from the Raspberry Pi to the breadboard. So first, get one of the wires and put it in this back slot that is 2 away from the left. So right there. And then this is the ground, so we're going to connect this to the negative side. And now get the other wire, and you're going to put it right here. Because this one right here is the 3.3 volt, which is how much you need to power an LED. And then you're going to put it in the positive side. We're going to put the resistor. The resistor is important because if we don't put it, the LED was going to explode because it's too much power. So we're going to put the resistor. So one end is going to be in the negative, and the other could be anywhere inside the breadboard. So just like find a spot and then put it in. Now we're going to put in our LED. So when you look at your LED, you'll notice that there's a longer side. The longer side has to face the positive. So when you put it, it's going to be like this. Okay, I'm going to show you how to turn this
Sorry, just found out the video is
into
not
this.
moving.
What you're needing is
So,
one wire that
let's
has like these needle-like
say-
things on both ends, two wires that have a needle on one end and an opening on the other, an LED and resistor, a breadboard, and a Raspberry Pi. First thing I'm going to do is to connect the two wires from the Raspberry Pi to the breadboard. So first, get one of the wires and put it in this back slot that is 2 away from the left. So right there. And then this is the ground, so we're going to connect this to the negative side. And now get the other wire, and you're going to put it right here. Because this one right here is the 3.3 volt, which is how much you need to power an LED. And then you're going to put it in the positive side. We're gonna put the resistor. The resistor is important because if we don't put it, the LED was gonna explode because it's too much power. So we're gonna put the resistor. So one end is going to be in the negative, and the other could be anywhere inside the breadboard. So just like find a spot and then put it in. Now we're gonna put in our LED. So when you look at your LED, you'll notice that there's a longer side. The longer side has to face the positive. So when you put it, it's gonna be like this. So the way power travels in the breadboard is that in this center-ish part, the power travels in a row like that. So we have to put it on the same row as the resistor like that. So make sure to put the longer end facing this way. Now we're gonna get the final wire and put this end anywhere in this row. So let's just put it like right there. And then get the other end and put it anywhere in the positive. And it'll light up.
Okay, so this is how you can connect a Raspberry Pi to power up the LED. Okay, then we will move on into how we can control the LED with Scratch. Right, so this time around we'll be using Scratch 3. In the video it's using Scratch 2, but you can follow on with using Scratch 3 on your Raspberry Pi. Alright, so again, to get Scratch 3, you can go to this Pi menu, and then you go to programming, then you will get Scratch 3 over here. Right? Okay, so let us watch the video tutorial on how to control our LED with some simple coding.
Hi, my name's Ian Buckley, and you are watching MakeUseOf.com. Today, we'll be making a start with Scratch, which is a visual programming language that comes bundled with the Raspberry desktop. We'll be using this to make a simple program which will react both to what we're doing on screen in terms of moving a character across the screen, and it will also turn an LED on and off, which we will attach to our GPIO pins. So to get started, let's set up the LED with our Raspberry Pi. So first we want to set up our Raspberry Pi. You'll notice that the power is not plugged in right now. That's always a good idea to not have it powered up when you're making your circuit, just in case you do something wrong and end up frying your Pi. All we're going to need today is 2 patch cables and one 220 ohm resistor. Although any other resistor value should work, your LED might not be as bright if you have a particularly high value. And then a normal red LED. So the way we're going to set this up is by just putting our LED into the breadboard to begin with. Now you want to make sure you know which side is the positive and which side is the negative side of your LED. You can usually tell because one of the legs will be slightly shorter than the other, and that is the negative side. But if you can't see that, if you look carefully at your LED, you can see on one side it is totally circular, and on the other side it has sort of a flat edge. And that's another way of telling if the LED is positive or negative on either side. So let's put it into our breadboard like this, with the positive side on the left here and the negative side on the right. And now we take our resistor, and we want to make sure that one of the legs of the resistor is in the same line in this direction as the positive line of the LED, and then the other leg can go in somewhere along here. There we go. Now, we also want to make sure that we can attach it to our Raspberry Pi, so we do that by attaching one of these cables to one leg of the resistor. This is the positive side, so this is going to go to our GPIO pin. And we take our other cable and attach it to the negative or ground side of our LED, and this one will be going to ground. So exactly where are we going to plug these in today? Well, we want to use GPIO pin number 5. So if we look on our handy little chart here, we can see that GPIO pin number 5 is here, and that is what, 6 or 7 pins in from the bottom? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So if we count carefully, we can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Always count twice. And we can see from the same chart that if we want to plug it into ground, next to GPIO pin number 5 is a ground pin.
So we can just stick our ground pin on this side of it. So have a quick check over once again, just to make sure that you've got all of these things in line. And once you're sure that all of these things are absolutely right and in place, take your power cord and boot up your Raspberry Pi. So to get started, we go to the Raspberry menu and look under Programming and select Scratch 2. And it will open up with the example project that is already there. Before we can get started with the Raspberry Pi, though, we have to add a couple of things, because you can do a lot of great things with Scratch already, but to make the GPIO pins on the Raspberry Pi work, we need to navigate to More Blocks and add an extension and select pi.gpio. And what this will do is it will give us the option to set our GPI pins to high and low. So let's look at how we'd make a program where you press a button and that changes the pin to high or low and turns our LED on or off. So to get started with our little program, let's drag our little cat over to the left side of the screen here and add something we can use as a button to click on. So down here in the sprites part of the screen, if you click this little face here, it'll allow you to choose a new sprite from their library. And I think this arrow looks good. So let's click OK, and it'll give us the arrow, which we can now drag up to the top of the screen. Now we want to start by making our blocks of code for our little cat. So make sure that you have the cat selected in the sprites menu just here. You can also just click on the cat itself. And you'll know if you have the right thing selected, because up in the top right here, it'll show a picture of a cat rather than the picture of the arrow. So what do we want to happen with our cat? Well, we want every time that this arrow is clicked, we'd like the cat to move. So we're going to tell it to move 10 steps. And we also want our GPIO pin, where we've already put our LED, to turn on. So in the More Blocks menu here, we can drag GPIO under Move 10 Steps, which means that'll be done just after the 10 steps have been moved. And in this little hole here, we want to select and enter the number of our GPIO pin. We had it set up today just on GPIO pin number 5, but if your GPIO pin is different, just have a look at your chart and make sure you put the right number in here. And once this has been turned on, we want it to stay on for just a short moment, and then we want it to turn off again. So if we look in the control menu, there is a thing here that says wait 1 second. That seems about the right amount of time. So we can clip that onto the bottom of our GPIO block here, go back to More Blocks, and drag the GPIO block out here. Once again, we want it to be the same pin, so GPIO number 5, but we want to set it to output low. Now, right now, this will only do something if we click on it and just tell it to do it. But what we want to happen is every time we click on our arrow, then it will carry this out. So if we now click on the arrow down here, we can use a different thing in here called an event in order to make this work. Specifically, we need to send a message. So every single time that this is clicked, we want it to send a message to our cat here. So we can use this block, which is when the sprite is clicked, it'll do whatever is beneath it. And we can also use broadcast, which will send a message out to everything with whatever we have written here. So we don't have to change it from message 1, but I'm going to add a new message, which is go. So every single time this is clicked, it broadcasts the message go to everything else. Now, it's quite simple. We only have 2 things. So we can go back to our cat now. And on the same events menu, when it receives go, we can just put that on the top, which means every single time that the arrow sends the message go, the cat will receive it and move. And if you look down at your breadboard now, you should notice that every time you click this arrow, the LED will come on and turn off again after 1 second. So our program works now. When we press the button, he moves and the LED turns on or off. But what happens when our cat gets all the way over to this other side of the screen and we keep pressing the button? Well, they go off the screen and there's not much we can do about it. So let's move them back to where they began and change our code so that every time the cat gets to the side of the screen, it automatically comes back to the start and the game can go on forever and ever and ever. So to do this, we need to look into our controls. What we need is if the cat hits the side of this screen, it needs to go back to the left side of the screen. So we use this if-then statement. We know we want to connect it to the bottom of our block here because we know we want to do it after it's moved and turn the light on or off. And after each one of these, if it is touching the edge, we want to send it back. So we use the sensing blocks to work this out. And the top one here says if it is touching. So we drag that into the little diamond shaped thing here. You'll know it's right because it glows when you put the mouse over it. And we want to change it from mouse pointer to edge. So if it is touching the edge of the screen at the end of this movement, it will do whatever is in here. So what do we want to do in here? Well, we want to move it. So let's look under the motion menu. And if you look, there is a go to here. So let's drag that into the block right here. And these values that are in here are actually where our character is already. So we don't need to change them. But let's say that you actually decided you wanted to start your character somewhere a little bit different. Let's say we wanted to put him a little bit further down here. Then what you can do is just put your mouse cursor over him, and you'll see in the bottom right-hand side of the screen here, the write down. So in this case, it's minus 184 and minus 68. I'm going to put that in here just to make it slightly easier to remember. I'm actually going to say minus 185. And I've already forgotten the other one. It was minus 67. Let's just say minus 70. Minus 70. So now, whenever it's touching the edge, it should move back over. So if we press our button, let's speed it up just a little bit. And we keep pressing our button. As soon as it hits the edge, it sends him back to the start so that we can keep going with this game forever. So this has been an introduction to using Scratch on the Raspberry Pi. There is a whole load of stuff you can do within Scratch. You can trigger sounds, and you can use all kinds of different things with the GPIO blocks of your Raspberry Pi. You don't have to necessarily attach an LED. You could attach a servo to it so that every time you press the button, it would wave at you or something like that. Scratch is a really good way to learn the basics of coding. All of these different sensor points and control points that we looked into are the basics of coding itself, and learning it in this block form is a great way to get started. There is also a load of great resources for beginner coding on the Make Use Of website, and there is an article that goes along with this video. If any of it was a little fast or hard to follow, you can read that on the main website too. So thank you very much for watching today, folks. My name's Ian. You've been watching MakeUseOf.com, and don't forget to subscribe for weekly tech tips and giveaways.
Right, so someone asked what is the name for this video. We'll compile with the PowerPoint and we'll put into the resources that you can refer to, all right? Okay, so this is a bit on how you can control the LED with Scratch, all right? So this is just some simple functions that we can control the sensors, the electrical components that we connect to the Raspberry Pi. But what about if we want to use more, do more complex features or more complex programs to control the LEDs? Let's say we want it to, we want to control the speed of blinking. We want to control the behavior of the LED, more having more customized behavior. How do we do it? All right, so this is where Python comes into picture. All right, so Scratch actually in this, all the blocks here is actually running on Python base. All right, so each of the blocks actually have predefined Python codes running behind it. Okay, so that's why it's good if you teach Scratch first. Then once your students can grab the logical thinking of it, their logical thinking is strong, and they are more matured to go into fully text programming, you can consider to teach them Python. All right, so let's take a little bit of sneak peek on what how Python looks like when you do it on Raspberry Pi. So the software that we are using in Raspberry Pi to code Python is called Tony. All right, Tony. Okay, you can see up here. It's called Tony. And on your Raspberry Pi, you can go to programming, and then you will find Tony Python IDE down here, right? Tony Python IDE. Okay, so this is what we use to code Python in Raspberry Pi. Okay, so let's see a little bit of comparison between Scratch and Python. Okay, so there are similarities between Scratch and Python. I accept Scratch runs Python as a code in the base. All right. So from here you can see that you can easily translate these blocks into Python codes. All right. So let's take this forever part and this while true part. Okay. So this forever is actually a loop. So when you see here at the end of it, there's an arrow here, which means go back. Right, so it's a loop, which means it's going on and on, right? And it's forever. So which means that it's going to go forever until you turn off your Raspberry Pi or you turn off or you stop the program from executing, right? So in Python, when you translate this forever over, it will become while true, all right? So this is how it looks like in Python when you want a forever loop. It becomes a while true. So all the codes inside, it will run forever until the program gets terminated. Okay, so you have this set GPIO to pin 17, right? So in here you actually use this GPIO 17. It is actually represented by this LED 17, right? So 17 is the pin that we are connecting our LED to. So that's why we put 17 over here or over here, right? And then we are giving our LED a name in Python. In Python, we are giving our LED a name called red. Okay, so this LED actually comes from an extension library that you saw just now when you need to connect to hardware on Raspberry Pi, you need another extension library, right? So maybe I go, let me show you a bit. Okay, somewhere here. Okay, yeah, here. So you need to get an extension library. So in Python, we also use predefined libraries. Okay, so this LED comes from the GPIO0 library, where we can get some of the objects that can be connected to the GPIO, right? So we have this GPIO 17. We set it to output high. In this library, it's already predefined. You're telling the LED to turn on, right? So setting the output to high is telling the LED to turn on. And then wait for 1 second is sleep 1, right? So sleep for 1 second, waiting for 1 second. Asking the program to sleep, don't do anything for a while, pause for a while for 1 second, right? And then we have this set GPIO to low with turning off the LED, okay? So this is actually how you can show your students how they can translate the coding blocks into Python, right? So this can be a start for the transition period from Scratch to Python. How can they build something in Scratch and how can they translate it into Python, right? And then they can, after that, they can move on into something more complicated, implementing more complicated features on Python. Okay, so the reason why we teach Scratch first and also then Python later, again, is to train the basic logical thinking of the students, right? Is to train their logical thinking. Once they are able to grasp it, it is easier for them to do advance their learning journey into Python, right? Which will let them implement more complex features. Okay, so we have a little bit of Python syntax right here. Okay, so syntax in programming, it means the format that you should write your code in. Or let's say if we take English as a language, you have your grammar. So in programming languages, you also have your grammar, which we call syntax. Okay. All right. So the first one that we have here is comments. A comment usually starts with a hashtag. So what is the function of a comment? If you have a program which is only full of comments, your program will do nothing. All right. So this comments is only for the programmer, or the person who writes the code, to put remarks on the code to tell themselves or to tell the person who is reading the code what this block of code or this line of code is doing. All right. So if you are learning programming also your first time, when you are following, you can also put some notes in the program with comments. Right. It won't affect your program. You can put as many notes as you want. Just make sure don't make it until you can't read it yourself. All right. Okay. So next thing is import. So import is what we use to bring or use to include the predefined libraries or the libraries written by someone else, or we maybe an advanced stage you wrote a library of your own. This is how we import the library, or we call it a pre-written module, into the program that we are writing. Okay. So this is, from here you can see that we are importing LED from GPIO0. So the GPIO0 is the library which we want to use to connect our LED to. All right. So in this library, it has already helped us to find write all the codes that are needed to connect our to the LED, which is already plugged onto the Raspberry Pi. Okay, and then you have the import sleep from time, right? So this sleep is for us to tell the program to sleep, and the library is called time. Okay, and then right. So after we import, we only after we import we can create our objects from the library. Okay, so from here our object is called myLED, right? So we are using the LED in the library here to create an object, right? So when we create an object using a library object, we are actually somewhat like cloning the object that is provided by the library and telling it we want a clone of this, and then create this object for me, just like what you have in the library. Okay, so this 17 over here is one of the parameters that this LED object needs to be able to initialize, to be able to clone the object, right? So this is this 17 refers to our GPIO pin number on the Raspberry Pi. Okay, then we go into a loop. So just now we've already touched on this, around through loops forever, right? So in Scratch it's called loop. Right, so this one, statements that are within a block must be indented, right? So there are ways in Python you use tab for it, okay? And then okay, why do we need to indent it? If we go back to look at Scratch, okay, you see that this 4 line of codes is embedded inside this forever, right? So while true, all these are underneath it. But what if we don't indent, we put sleep over here? Okay, if we put sleep, we don't indent the sleep, it means that you are moving this weight out of the forever loop block, right? So your loop will always just run these top 3 commands if you don't put this inside. So if you don't indent this, your while true, once it turns on, it pauses for 1 second, Once it turns off, it will directly go to turn on. It won't sleep for 1 second anymore. Right? So this is the purpose of indenting your codes, right? To tell it, okay, I want this to work within this first line of code, which is not indented. Okay. So these are some very surface, very little info on Python. So if you are interested in Python, you can also go to Raspberry Pi page, their official page website. They have the resources. You can look on the Python Jumpstart, or you can scan the QR code to get insight also, right? Okay. All right, so it's starting to get a little bit complicated, almost at the most complicated part. Okay, so with all these circuits, we have all the wires, the components plugged in, right? So how do we want to better visualize our circuits or better visualize our codes, our program, right? So the method that we use is called abstraction to help us simplify and visualize our computing projects. Okay, so by abstraction, we are hiding the necessary details, right? So when you see here, you can see there's an illustration on the left side and an illustration on the right side. So you can see here, on the left side, that illustration, you get to see a lot of extra items. You get to see the GPIO pin labels all around. You have those unused ones, 5 volt, 3 volt, 3, 2, 3, 4. All those are unused, right? But on the right side, you can see that it's very clear. You would only be using ground pin and the pin number 17, right? So those are the only two that you'll be using in your circuit. So the right side is what we call a schematic diagram. There's only lines, simple shapes and labels to tell us what we are using in our circuit. So there are no extra information. It helps people to better visualize and better visualize the circuit and let the students understand more what is in the circuit, how the circuit flows, right? So abstraction is to hide the unnecessary details, right? So we don't see the whole breadboard in the schematic diagram. Okay, so another way how we can abstract our hardware is to if we can take some of the things that that they usually encounter in their daily life. Let's say we have this traffic light block over here. Okay, so you can actually build a simple circuit which can reflect how a traffic light function, right? So if you see on the right side, it's actually using a Raspberry Pi and a breadboard and 3 LEDs to illustrate out how to create or how a traffic light works, how a traffic light circuit works, right? So this is another way of hardware abstraction. So other than hardware, of course, our software, we can abstract it also, our code abstraction. So you see here we have LED blink. So do you remember just now how many lines of code do we need to tell the to get the LED to blink? We need to turn it off. We need to ask for it to wait for 1 second, and then we need to tell it to turn off, and then ask for it to wait for 1 second, and then go and turn on, and so on and so forth, right? So here we have the built-in libraries. So the LED library, actually the GPIO 0 library, actually the LED object has this function called blink, right? So you just need to write 1 line of code to ask it to blink, right? Instead of the 5 lines of code over here. Okay, so you can actually abstract. This is what we call abstraction. We put all this into one function, And then whenever we want to reuse the same logic, same kind of codes, we just call that function, right? So the function here is called link. So these are some of the other functions inside the LED library and the GPIO library for the LED object. Okay, and then right, so we have already covered some of the basic foundation that we need to create a digital making project, right? So don't worry if you can't get it all for today. There will be a 3 years course coming out for you very soon by next month or a few months later, right? So stay tuned, and if you are really interested to get to know and get yourself trained, so you can share this interesting knowledge with your students, you can participate in the upcoming training program, which is 3 years. All right. Okay. So before we look at an example that the Raspberry Foundation has come out with, the Raspberry Foundation has created, we'll look into some of the components that we will usually use in digital making projects. All right. So just some basic components. So we have the button, the buzzer, light sensor, motion sensor, temperature probe. These are some of the pretty common ones that we usually use in our digital making projects. Okay, so there are many other more that you can use in the digital making project. So if you want to watch more, you want to find out more, you can always go to Raspberry Pi's official website, look at their projects, okay, or you can scan here. You get to find a lot of example projects in Raspberry Pi, in the Raspberry Pi website. Okay, so you have to choose Raspberry Pi to find Raspberry Pi projects, and then you can choose the topic that you prefer, or you can just let it be, and it will show all the topics it has. And the software that you are using, maybe you are using Scratch or Scratch 3, or you want to use Tony IDE already, you are advancing it to it, and you can select the level that you want to look into first. There's beginner, intermediate, and also advanced levels. All right. So there are all kinds of projects. There are a lot of projects for you to refer to later. Right. You can get the website. You can get into the website by scanning this QR code or the website link. Right. So this is the website link. Let me send it to the chat. Okay, so you can come here and look at some of the example projects. So what I will be showing you is a robot buggy, and they are building a robot buggy with a Raspberry Pi. Okay, so in this video, not only we are looking at the project, how you build the project itself, and we are also seeing like how a young learner and a coach, how do they interact with each other. Of course, this is a one-on-one one, but you can improvise it, how you can use it for a classroom, right? So you can watch how the facilitator and the young learner interact with each other in this learning process to build a robot buggy, right? So, right, let's get on and watch our video.
Hi there, digital makers, and welcome to this week's Digital Making at Home from the Raspberry Pi Foundation. My name is Mark, and here's my sidekick, Jimmy.
Hello.
And what we're going to be looking at this week is the theme of robotics. So what I thought I'd do in this video today is I would show you how to build your very own little robot buggy. This is all called physical computing. It's where we're going to use a Raspberry Pi to interact with things in the real world. And if we have time, we might even try and make it controllable by Android device as well, on your phone. So we might give that a go as well. So let's get started with this. I'm just going to change screens here and show you some of the kit that I've got here. So here we go. So what I've got here is this. Jim, what's this?
A Raspberry Pi.
That is a Raspberry Pi, right? Let's see if you can guess the other ones. Let's have a look at what are these.
Motors.
Motors, well done. What's this?
Battery.
That's a battery pack. Tricky one now, you ready? What's this thing called?
Screwdriver.
Yep, a screwdriver, well done. This, but I don't suppose you'll know what this is called, will you? This is what's called a, I'll just put it under the camera there. This is a ball cast. Yeah?
Okay.
Okay. And then finally, I've got two different varieties of what are called motor controller boards. All right. So this is a really cheap little motor controller board. You can find them on things like Amazon and AliExpress. This one's a little bit more expensive, but we're going to use this motor controller board today, which is made by a company called Fortronics. And the reason we're going to use this one is because this one can attach directly straight onto the GPIO pins of your Raspberry Pi. Okay, whereas this one, we'd have to do some wiring up. So we'd have to use lots of little wires to get to it. Okay, so I'm just going to put this one away. But this is the one we're going to use today. So the first thing Jimmy and I are going to do is we're going to wire up the Raspberry Pi to the motor controller, and wire up all the motors and all the power. Okay, is that all right? Right, this takes a little bit of dexterity. So let's see what we can do, Jim. All right, so let's do the fiddly bit. The first thing we need to do is, because we're going to attach a hat to the Raspberry Pi, yeah, these things are called hats when they just sit on the pins. We're going to have to power off our Raspberry Pi. Okay, so I've got the Raspberry Pi at the moment. It's linked up via what we call VNC. You'll notice on the Raspberry Pi, I don't have a keyboard and mouse plugged in, and I don't have a monitor plugged in. Instead, what I did earlier is I went to Preferences on the Raspberry Pi menu here. So I go to Preferences and Raspberry Pi Configuration. Okay, and what I've done is in the Interfaces tab, I've just enabled VNC. Okay, and then on my Windows laptop that I'm on at the moment, I've downloaded this thing called VNC Viewer. And because I know the IP address of the Raspberry Pi, that means I can remote connect to it. So we're just going to shut down our Raspberry Pi to start off with so that we can attach that hat. Okay, so go shut down. All right, and you can see my VNC connection has disappeared. All right, so my Raspberry Pi shut down. All right, so just pull the power out of the Raspberry Pi, that USB-C connector there. Got good hard tug, excellent. So we always power off our Pis before we place hats on. So now you can place this hat on, so it goes this way round on those pins, yeah?
Okay.
Excellent, we're just going to make sure those pins are all lined up properly. No, back a bit more. There we go, and push on. Push quite hard. Excellent. Yeah, brilliant. That's perfect. Now the fiddly bit. So now we've got to put all our motors and stuff in. Okay, so let's just turn this like this. Okay. All right. Now then, we've got these three little terminal blocks here. 1, 2, 3. The middle one is going to be for power. All right. And the other two are for the motors. And I don't care which wire goes into which slot, because we're going to show a little trick later on so we can control all that code. All right. So what you need to do is place one wire into there and another into there. Can you see if you can do that?
What?
So that's it. A little bit down. There we go. And then, yeah, that's perfect. Now screw it on. So in the top, that's it. And then righty-tighty. Righty-tighty. That's it. Until it's really firm down. Yeah. Does that feel about as low as it can go? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, let's just have I'll do a little tiny tug like that. Okay, then what I'm going to do is we're going to place the rest of the motors in. Okay, so we've put our motors in, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
And we've also wired up our battery pack to that central terminal.
Yeah.
Now, what will happen is when it doesn't matter which way around the motors go, yeah? It doesn't matter which wire we put in which for the motors, but the battery pack is important. Okay, so the red wire is normally for what? You can take a guess, 50-50, positive or negative.
go positive.
Yeah, positive.
Oh, positive. Okay.
So that's that goes to V in. V in will be labelled on your motor controller board somewhere, and the black goes to ground. Okay, so that's important you get that the right way around. So now our motors are all set up. You'll notice, or you might be able to see on camera, that I've actually labelled the motors. So we've got an L on one, okay, and an R on the other. And now what we're going to do is we're going to do some coding. So what I need to do is I need to reconnect to the Raspberry Pi. Oh no, we need to power on the Raspberry Pi. So do you want to plug that into that USB-C port there? Okay. Brilliant. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to wait for that to power up, and then we should be able to connect to it using VNC. Okay, so we have VNC loaded up, and Jimmy's going to drive the keyboard now. So if you want, Jimmy, could you go to the Raspberry Pi logo up at the top? That's it. And then just go to programming and then Mu. Mu doesn't come pre-installed on Raspberry Pi OS, but it is in the recommended software packages, so it's really easy to install. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to import to the robot class from the GPIO0 module, yeah? So you'll notice that, that's it. You'll notice that Jimmy's using tab completion, which you've got in Mu, so you can press tab on certain keywords and it'll just auto-complete it for you. Good, so we've got a robot class. We need a name for a robot. What do you want to call it?
Rob.
Rob the robot. So Rob equals robot, that's it. And now we need to put in those pin numbers that the motor controller is connected to. Now for different motor controllers, the pins are going to be different numbers. The particular motor controller I've got here is sitting on the Raspberry Pi. Just move that over. I know that that one is connected to pins 7, 8, 9, and 10, okay, of the GPIO pins. But if you look at the documentation of the motor controller you've got, you'll be able to see what pins it's connected to. So let's get those pin numbers in. So in our robot, we need to open, that's it, 2 sets of brackets, 7, 8. Close, good. And we need a comma between those 2 sets of brackets, that's it. 9 and 10, good, perfect. And then hit enter. And the command is
Rob.forward.
Good. And then open close brackets at the end of that. Right then, now, if we run this now, go on, sorry, just save it as Rob the robot. You've already got the save thing there, so just overwrite that one. That's it. That was our test one. Good. So we're going to switch on our thing. So hit run. That's it. Okay then. So our motors are going, yeah? And they're going to keep going for a long time. In fact, they're going to keep going forever. All right. So what we need to do is we need to put a stop command in there. All right. So underneath rob.forward, go rob.stop, open close brackets. Now, what's the problem with this if we just run this now?
It'll go forward for like a second and then just stop.
Yeah. In fact, you're probably not even going to get to see it go forward. So what can we do?
I can add in a wait.
Yeah. What do we call that in Python?
A sleep.
Good. So what do we have to do to get the sleep?
So is it from sleep import sleep?
Close. It's from time.
Oh, okay, right.
Import sleep, and it's lowercase in this case. Good. Okay, and then we can put in a sleep for 5 seconds between rob.forward and rob.stop. That's it. Yep. Good. Let's run that and see whether that works. Oh, have I got the power on? So you run it first, so we can make sure that Rob stopped. We can see that the program's running at the bottom. And now I can see the little chevrons. See those little chevrons in the bottom corner?
Yeah.
That means that the program's finished running. So if I turn this on now, okay, and now run the program again, so stop and run. And our motors are going. 5 seconds. Right then, now we've got to figure out whether we've got these numbers, 7, 8, 9, 10 in the right order. Okay, So think about this. Here's my motors, and I've got the right and left I've labeled on them. All right then. Now, if these were sitting in a robot that's facing this way, facing the way the arrows are, which way do you think the L should move? Which direction should they spin? Should they spin
forward?
They should, if they spin forward, the wheels will be turning in that direction, won't they? Yeah, and the robot will go forward. So let's run the program again and see whether that motor is going forward. Is it?
It looks like it's going backwards.
It looks like it's going backwards. So let's have a play around with our code and see if we can fix that. So what I would do is, I'm not sure which one's which. I would change 7.8 to 8.7 and see whether that makes a difference. Perfect. And run again. They're going forwards now?
Yep.
Brilliant. Press stop. Okay, now, oh, I didn't see which way the right one was going, so let's run it again. Both go in the right direction, yeah? Now we've got to check, though, whether we've got left and right correct. Okay, so stop the code. That's it, actually wait for... Stop and... That's it, good. Okay, so let's just check. So instead of rob.forward, type rob.left. Okay, brilliant. Now just let's think about this a second before we run it. If it's turning left, yeah, which way round should the left wheels go? If you wanted the robot to turn this way, what should happen to those left wheels?
You shouldn't move.
They might not move and just the right one go forward. What else could we do to make it turn sharper though?
Move those ones backwards.
So if on robot.left, L should move backwards.
Okay.
So let's run.
Yep.
Brilliant. Okay, and stop it.
Oh wait, you have to.
Oh yeah. It'll stop after 5 seconds. It's fine. So we've got that, our left motor and our right motor is correct. What we could have done, if they were the wrong way round, we just swap these tuples around. So we put that one over this side and this one over that side. Okay. Right. What we need to do now is we've got our basic robot. Okay. What we're going to do now is we're going to stop recording for a little bit, and we are going to use this box here. Okay. That I've got. All right. I'm going to use this box to make my buggy. So what I'm going to do is inside the box, I'm going to place the motors, yeah, with the wheel, it's sticking out to the little axle sticking out, and I'm going to put some wheels on. Oh, I forgot to include wheels in our kit. No. What we'll do is I'll get some wheels out and I'll show everyone what it looks like. But yeah, you're also going to need some wheels for this project. Right, so let's stop recording for a bit and get this buggy built together, shall we?
Yeah.
Brilliant. All right, so Jimmy and I have now built the buggy. I'm going to show you what it looks like. So let's just switch over and have a look here. So what I've got is inside the box, I've put the 2 motors, and I've still got my Raspberry Pi and the little power pack there, and then the power lead still there. Okay, and then I push the axles of the motors through the side of the box on each side so that I've got wheels. And then you might be able to see in here, down here, I've just put in a bit of wire, and all that's doing is it's threading through holes in the box to make sure that the motor doesn't shift and move around. So that's just holding that end of the motor down in place. All right, because when the robot starts to move backwards, if that wasn't there, then the motors would just lift up. All right then. So should we go back to your code, Jim, and have a look at, so it's the 4th one now. That's it. And have a look at how this works on the robot. Now, I will say, if we were doing this for real, okay, it's a really rubbish prototype, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, but it's going to work. If we were doing this for real, I'd be running the Raspberry Pi off a power pack rather than having it plugged in. But I can't find my power pack because I'm pretty sure Jimmy's lost it. So we're going to run it, it's still running off the mains, which means we're not going to be able to see the robot move around, but we'll still be able to see the wheels and everything move. So let's just place that like that. Okay then, so Jimmy, do you want to run your code and we'll be able to see the wheels turning? There we go. Get 5 seconds, and then it stops. All right then, so that's all working. Okay, and let's just run the code again and try and catch it before it falls off the table. Okay, so I'm just going to lift this camera up a little bit higher so you can see that there. Right, you're going to run the code and then catch it. Let's move that back. There we go, and it's turning. Right, and that's good. Now the other thing I would normally do, let's just get that back there. The other thing I would normally do is I take this this caster here and I would attach it to the front of the robot. All right, but we're not, because so this is like a third wheel that sits at the front. Yeah, let me just take it out of this plastic. Here we go. So this is like a third wheel and it'll sit at the front, and it means that your robot can turn. But as we're not going to be driving this one around, we're just going to be showing you how to code it. Then I'm not going to put that on at the moment. All right then. So we did talk really briefly saying we might try and make a remote control for the robot. So should we show everyone how to do that?
Yep.
Cool. So let's get onto our code. So what we're going to do is we're going to get rid of that. Brilliant. And then up underneath from time import sleep. In fact, we can get rid of from time import sleep now. We don't need that anymore.
All right.
Okay, so we want from blue dot, all lowercase, and then import blue dot with a capital B and a capital D. Excellent. Okay. So Blue Dot is a Python library written by a very good friend of mine called Martin, who also works at the Raspberry Pi Foundation. And he has written this Python library, and he's also written an Android app that goes with it. I'm afraid it's not available on iPhones, it's Android only, this one. So I've installed the Blue Dot app from the Google Play Store. Just do a quick search for Blue Dot and you'll find it and install it onto your phone. And the other thing I've done is you might notice up in the top right hand corner of the screen there, that Bluetooth icon. You want to just give that a click. And what I've done is I've paired, if you look down at the bottom, there's my Android phone, okay, and it's paired. We don't need to connect to anything at the moment. Once I've paired it, yeah, Blue Dot will take care of the rest. So you can click off that. Right, so we need to set up our Blue Dot object. So BD equals Blue Dot, open brackets, close brackets. Capital, that's it.
Oh.
Open, close, excellent. And now what we're going to do is we're going to create a couple of functions. We're going to create a function called move, and that's going to handle the movement. And we're going to create a function called stop, which will make it all stop, okay? So if you enter a couple of times, and we'll go def move, and then open some brackets straight after move and type in pos. And what's going to happen is the Blue Dot library is going to pass in this thing called pos, which is going to be your position on the screen of the Android app, okay? So wherever your finger is, that's where pos will be. All right, so put a colon. You're going to yawn. Okay, and enter. Okay, so if pos dot top, colon, so that's if our finger's at the top, enter. And then we want it to, so if our finger's at the top of the screen, which direction do we want to move it?
Forward, so
yeah,
Rob dot forward.
Rob dot forward, brilliant. Okay, if the pos is at the bottom.
Should I just copy this?
Yeah, except you don't want to use an if, do you?
What do I want to use?
Else if, what's that in Python? elif, that's it. Elif, pos dot bottom, enter. And then it's because you haven't put a colon at the end of your line. That's it. Brilliant. Rob dot backwards. Now you can copy and paste if you want. So, that's it. And then if it's right, we want pos. If if the position is on the right, we want the robot to turn right. Oh, it's hot in here, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a really sunny day in Lincolnshire today.
I cannot do that.
And then if it's left, Then we want the robot to turn left. Brilliant, and hit enter. Okay, a couple of times. We like 2 line breaks between functions in Python. Yeah, don't have to. It's just like what we like to do. So we now do our stop function, def stop. Now we don't need to pass pos into this, so you can just open close brackets and put a colon. Enter. And then what you're going to command the robot to do. Have you changed your robot's name all of a sudden?
All right.
Yeah. Stop. Open brackets, close brackets. Okay, and hit enter a couple of times again. Brilliant. And now we're just going to set up so that blue dot runs those functions. Okay. So what we're going to say is bd dot when underscore pressed equals move. So that means that whenever it's pressed, it's going to call the move function. bd dot when moved equals, and then we're going to pass it the move function again. So that's if your finger, say your finger starts off at the top and then you move it to the bottom, yeah, it would go from being going forward to going backwards. And lastly, bd dot when released equals stop. So when you lift your finger off the blue dot, it should stop. Okay, then. So what we're going to do is run that. Yep. Now you can see down at the bottom it says server started. Yeah. So what it's doing at the moment is it's waiting for blue dot to connect. So let's see if you can see on my Android phone. There we go. And what I'm looking for is I'm looking for the oh no, wrong one. Let's do that again. I have to turn it the right way around so I can do this. I'm looking for Raspberry Pi on here. So I'll click Raspberry Pi. And there we can see that big blue dot. Okay, now this is going to get tricky. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold the camera up. Let's go up a little bit higher with the camera. There we go. And then there's our robot. So Jimmy, just do one little push at the top. Good. And our robot goes forward, push at the back. Brilliant. Left and right. Excellent. And there we have it. Really, really simple way of remote controlling your robot using blue dot. Okay. Well done. That was excellent work. Let's just go back up to that. So that's it for today. As I said, you can find this project at rpf.io/dm-buggy. And in there, there's also details how to get to a few other robot things, including how to do the blue dot code, how to remote control it with buttons, yeah, on a breadboard, how to remote control from another Raspberry Pi, and there's also a project on there to create a line following robot, so you can have one of these robots that follows a line on the ground. So thanks a lot, everyone, for listening to me and Jimmy today, and we shall.
All right, so this is a demo between with a young learner and a coach to build a robot buggy. All right. So if you are interested, if you are interested, you can go onto the website just now and browse the projects that they have. All right, so there's a request here to show how to open up the Raspberry Pi test that you have. I currently can't show it to you right now, but I can show you a little video of it. Right. Let me get the video.
Hi guys, this is Obo from Sci.
Yeah. Okay, so actually to open up the case is quite simple. You just need to press on the two sides of the white color cover.
So we have
right?
the white
See
and
how
red
it
color
does
case, and another one is the gray and black color case. So of course,
So if you press it and then you can just open it. But be careful for yours because you have a small fan attached to the pin. So when you pull it up, just slowly. And then if you really need, maybe you take a picture of how the pins and the fan is connected before you remove the connection between the fan and the pins. All right. Okay. So you just need to press on the white color cover, the two sides of the white color cover, slowly lift it up. So that will be sufficient to open up the cover. Okay. So like we said just now, we have a 3 years course upcoming. So don't worry if you can't get all of them today. I know it's very congested. There's too much info in just one session, but there will be a in-depth course coming up for 3 years. So if you are interested, you can join the course. Right? It will be organized by Swinburne. So Swinburne will be the one teaching. Okay. So right now I'm going to show you some of the things that are already available in your Raspberry Pi, but it's not technical, not necessarily technical related, right? So these are some of the materials that the ministry they have loaded into the Raspberry Pi that they distribute to you, right? So you can use them for now as a start to use the Raspberry Pi. Okay, so in the beginning, I've already introduced to you this Internet in a Box. Okay, so this Internet in a Box is also actually a website inside the server or the host Pi. All right, it's loaded in the server or the host Pi. So when you are on your Raspberry Pi, if you are on your server Raspberry Pi, you can directly open up the web browser. Okay, if you are on your client Pi, you need to connect to the server Pi to be able to access this, all right? So the way that you access is box.lan on type this and press enter on your browser, then you will get to see this page, all right? This page is not available online. You cannot access it through internet. You must connect your Pi, or you must use your host Pi or server Pi, or connect your client Pi to the server Pi to be able to access this website, right? It is not available on the internet. Okay, so in the beginning, someone asked, how can you share the files using the server Pi to the client Pi? So it's quite easy. You see here, you have a USB stick or drive in this website. So on this page, you have this stick or drive. So you just need to connect your pen drive or your hard disk to the USB ports. Okay, as long as your Pi gets to read it, you can click into this USB stick or drive. It will list your drives right here. Right? So now we don't have a USB connected. Okay, so once you click into the drive, your USB, you'll be able to serve the files that from your client Pi, okay, that are connected to your that are in the pen drive or the hard disk that is connected to the server or the host Pi, right? So once your client Pi connects to it, it can serve the files. Right, so there are other items in this Internet in the Box that you can use. There are this wiki and keywords, where there are Wikipedias that is filtered for the school's use, right? Okay, and then you have the e-learning portal. We'll go back into this later. Okay, and then there's world maps, and then there's media wiki, where so you can show your students the world map, using this world map to teach your students maybe geographical topics. And you have media wiki. You can find some pictures over here. Okay, and then the last one is the Khan Academy Lite. Right, this Khan Academy, they have a lot of tutorials, a lot of videos, lesson videos that are available online. All right, they have a lot of levels of learning, from elementary school, primary school, secondary school, university level. Even after you graduate, you can still come here and look for some of the resources to learn from, right? So this one is usually online, right? Khan Academy is usually online. They have, they have a lot of topics also, right? So this Khan Academy is usually available online, but this one, the ministry that has prepared for you, this one is available offline, all right? So you can see all the topics that are available inside here that you can go and browse through. You don't need internet, you just need to connect your client Pi to the server Pi or the host Pi, or use the host Pi or server Pi to browse these resources. You do not need any internet, right? So this one is the offline version, okay? So it's available offline, okay? So next we're going to the e-learning, okay? Okay, once you go into the e-learning, okay, so you will see the available courses. For now, you have the master materials. Okay, once you go in, you need to log in, or you can log in as a guest. Okay, so in this portal, you have announcements from ministry. So once you connect to the internet, you get these announcements. And then you have the teacher's guidebooks. Okay, so you have science and math available right now. Okay, so these are non-technical related resources. And you have a lot of video webinars over here, which you can share amongst the Pis, not just the server Pi, with the client Raspberry Pi. And if your Windows PC can be connected, you can also browse all these materials also, right? So you have all these videos which are non-technical related, okay, on some general knowledge or some soft skills, right? So you can take your time and go and browse through all these materials, okay? I'm sure it's quite a lot for you to use already at this stage, okay? And the next thing that I want to introduce to you on Raspberry Pi is LibreOffice, okay? So on Raspberry Pi, you also get the Raspberry Pi version of Microsoft Office. That is how we describe it. So you have Microsoft Word on LibreOffice. It's called LibreOffice Writer, okay? And you have PowerPoint on LibreOffice called LibreOffice Impress. And you have Excel called LibreOffice Calc. All right, so to access all this LibreOffice software, you just have to go to the Pi menu again, and then go to Office. Then you get to see all the LibreOffice apps, right? So the three just now that I mentioned are the ones that we commonly use, which is the Writer as Word, Microsoft Word, Impress as PowerPoint, Calc as Excel, all right? So these are the three that we commonly use. The others, I'll just briefly let you know. Microsoft, no. LibreOffice base is the Microsoft Access, which we use for maintaining database, all right? And then LibreOffice Draw is for you to draw flow charts and some drawings, right? So if you want to use, if you are teaching programming, you can also use this. Teach the students how to create a flow, draw out the flow of their program before they start going into coding, right? So this is also a way of abstraction of how we, how we guide our students or guide those who learn programming to start with logical planning, right? And then we have math, which you can use for creating scientific formulas and equations. Okay. All right, so we are almost at the end of our webinar today. And so we'll move on to the Q&A session. So while I'm answering the Q&A questions, I would like to invite you to complete this post-webinar survey. You can scan this QR code or click on the link in the chat room, and also fill in the attendance, your attendance for today. There will be another link sent to the chat room soon. second. Okay. Okay. So how to share document from server Pi to client Pi? Okay, so you just have to, let me go back. You just have to connect your pen drive or your hard disk to the server Pi. Okay, and then you can go to this box.lan. Then you click on this USB stick or drive to access the files on in the pen drive or the hard disk that is connected to the server drive, server Pi, right? Okay. So if you have any issues with it, issues with your Pi, not being able to access, you can contact Science, which is the helpline on your Pi cover, right? Okay. So while you are completing the post-webinar survey, we will answer some of the we will answer the Q&A questions right now. Okay. Okay, so what are the differences between admin version and client version? I'm not sure if your admin version refers to the server or host Pi. So the difference between the two is that server Pi is the one that is holding on to the materials. You can say it's the master Pi, which it can share the resources to the client Pis, right? So if there are updates, when you connect the Pi connect the server Pi to the internet, it gets updated, and then you can again connect your client Pis to the server Pi to get the updated materials, right? Okay, so the next question, to shut down, you choose log out, shut down, yes. And to switch on, you only need to connect the power supply. Yes, you only need to connect the power supply to the port, switch on the electricity, then your Pi will turn on automatically, all right? So that's why we say always connect your Raspberry Pi power source last, right? Always connect the power source last. Okay, so the camera, is it a camera or it's a port for you to connect the camera, right? This one is not the camera itself, it's a port, right? Okay. It's for more like it's for connecting camera sensors instead of connecting the commercial cameras itself. Okay. Right, so a lot of you requested for the video and the presentation. No worries, this one will be emailed to your schools, and if you have submitted your emails, we will be emailing it personally to you too. Right. So any instructions or guidelines on how to connect the Raspberry to the school Wi-Fi, right? So we head back to the front. All right, let me just go on the Raspberry Pi to show it to you. All right, so if you need to connect to the Wi-Fi, you want to connect to the Wi-Fi, you just click on this network icon, and then select the Wi-Fi that you need to connect to and input the password if you need, if there's password required, all right? So it's just like how you connect to the Wi-Fi on your Windows PC. You just need to click on this and select the Wi-Fi, input the password if required. Okay, so your laptop suddenly got stuck during the scratch part, all right? No worries, this video will be posted online. The recordings of these 3 days will be posted online. And okay, so can it use Hanyu in Word Raspberry? If can, how? Okay, we will include this guide in the Raspberry in the FAQ, right? So if you can share document via the USB stick, let us get back to you on that, and we'll provide the answers more detailed in the FAQ. All right. Okay. Can you share the Python programming language? Don't know what the terms refer to. Right. So this programming language, you can actually refer to Raspberry Pi's website for more details for Jumpstart. What we are showing today is some of the examples just to expose to you, show you maybe how it's like to program in Scratch and how it's like to do more advanced programming using Python, right? Right, can't wait to test it out. I'm happy that you are excited. Okay, so that's all for today for our Q&A session. I hope everyone had a fruitful session. Before you leave, let us take a group photo. So I'd like to request everyone to turn on your camera, show us your beautiful faces, your handsome faces, put on your beautiful smile, and let's take a group photo. Right, so there are 5 pages. On my count of 3, keep your smile, hold on to your smile, right? And then I'll take the photos for the 5 pages. Okay, is everyone ready? Right. Okay, on my count of 3, 1, 2, 3. Hold on, we still have 4 pages to go. Three more pages to go. Okay, 2 more pages to go. Last one. Hold on, last one. All right, so thank you everyone. Thank you very much for attending today. And for those who have joined repeatedly these few days, thank you for your enthusiasm, and we hope you really had a fruitful session during these sessions. All right. Have a good day, everyone. Okay, for those who have missed the attendance form, we are posting the link in a while in the chat room again. For SPLKPM, we will be submitting these attendances that you fill in to the ministry, right? So the slides will be shared with the recording together. You're welcome, everyone. All right, so we'll be ending this Zoom right now. Okay, bye, everyone.